College football nerds here talking Wisconsin and Ohio State, and we have a model for y'all. Models have been a little wild this week. I got Josh with me. He's going to introduce the model to you. It's week 4. We wait 3 weeks. We gather data. We don't release a model based on recruiting rankings or what we think a preseason poll looks like. We wait and get some data. And then our first couple of weeks, it's still a little weird, but it's a good talking point. So y'all hang with us. Ohio State, Josh, absolutely dragged Toledo. But all the naysayers, they're saying two things right now that are bothering us a little bit. They're saying Notre Dame win is a bad win because Notre Dame sucks now. And you gave up 21 points to the Rockets. Well, Josh, I think that we got some credibility to say a little bit about this because we were one of the people that told Ohio State fans before Notre Dame lost to Marshall and almost lost to Cal, Notre Dame is not great this year. They're not the 5th best team in the country. But we don't go back and really pick apart that win because you won the game, right? There's plenty of opportunities to show dominance, but we're not going to go back and now ding you and drop you down to 6th or 7th because you struggled with a team that's not very good. And there's probably some like misunderstanding about this 21 points from the Rockets. Josh, they killed them. Let's get into this a little bit and let's dispel some of the haterade that's being drank out there.
So the first point is, yes, we kind of said from the beginning of the year that we didn't think Notre Dame was great. And we said in our Michigan preview, we felt like Michigan was the team that should have been ranked 4 or number 5. And I said at the time, looking at the roster, I thought Notre Dame was probably a top 15 team. It turns out that probably was too generous, but I didn't know how bad the quarterback situation was going to be. But we knew the roster wasn't great. There were a lot of reasons to think that. I don't know why the media jumped on being as high as they are. Okay, well, everybody's now screaming they know why the media jumped on them. They always do. But there really was no reason for them to be ranked that high. That said, it was week 1. Ohio State got Notre Dame's best shot. Ohio State won that game by double digits. Ohio State lost Smith and Jigba early in the game. There are a lot of reasons why Ohio State would be off kilter, and they were out of rhythm, and they didn't look right. That does not mean that Ohio State isn't capable of dominating someone later. I think there's always a big difference in understanding how you want to evaluate a resume and whether or not you win or lose games, and how you want to evaluate projections downstream. And the most hate we usually get from people is the latter part, right? Maybe you beat a team in a big upset. And what'll happen is somebody will have a big upset in a game, and, Florida beating Utah is maybe an example. And everybody will say, oh, well, we beat Utah. How dare you say we might lose to Kentucky? Yeah, I'm going to give you credit for beating Utah. You beat them. You won the game. That's all that matters. Oklahoma in 2020 beat Florida. But if you want me to evaluate how Oklahoma in 2020 would have done against other teams, I have to look at the situation and say, yeah, but Florida was playing literal third stringers across the whole defensive front due to opt-outs. And these guys, Kadarius Toney and Kyle Pitts, that are pretty good, did not play in that game, along with literally the entire starting receiving corps. So those things matter from a projection standpoint. Ohio State in the Notre Dame game got the W. That's all that matters. End of discussion for resume building purposes. And it was a little bit of a struggle, but they got the W. It was a double-digit win. From a projection standpoint, it wasn't great on its own, but given the oddities of that game and that it was week 1 and where they're at now, I really can push that aside because the offense I saw, to turn this back around and talk about this game, the offense I saw against Toledo, the offense that scored 11 touchdowns in a football game, was at a different level. CJ Stroud, my criticism was out of rhythm. And it's something that I've seen from him a couple times. When he gets a lot of pressure in particular, he gets his footwork gets off, his timing gets off, the offense starts to sputter. And this offense that Ohio State's built is a little bit prone to stuttering when things aren't working well. It's not unique to Ohio State. Alabama right now is way stuck in the mud in that sputtering mess. Bryce Young, the Heisman Trophy winner, has the same sort of struggles that Stroud has, maybe I think a lot worse than Stroud in that regard. So it's not unique. And Ohio State has pulled themselves out of it by leaning more on guys that have a lot of experience. The same way I think Alabama probably in about 4 weeks is going to look like a very different offense than they do right now. But for this game, I feel like that Toledo game, 13.6 yards per attempt from CJ Stroud, over 6 yards per carry rushing. Yeah, I mean, Ohio State has got things together. They've got things clicking, and that Notre Dame game can be put behind them.
On the other side, Josh, we've got a Wisconsin team that every year when you look at the beginning of the season, you look and see if Big Ten East teams drew Wisconsin and assume that that's going to be a pretty rough stretch wherever they sit on the schedule. And Wisconsin may not be that good this year, and that's a rarity for us because we're usually pretty high on Wisconsin. But I like Allen, I like Malusi. They're good running backs, but I don't know that you beat an Ohio State with good running backs, and so that's my concern in this game. And I think that's why the spread is where it is. I don't think that Ohio State fans are going to be shocked when they hear us pick Wisconsin fans are going to be shocked when they hear us pick Ohio State to win, but my concern in this game, which may not be an issue for Wisconsin in other games, is twofold. One, we don't know what we don't know about Washington State. They might be good. They might not be. They might be bad. I think they're probably mediocre. I don't think they're bad. I think they're better than they've been. My big concern is Mertz, Josh. My big concern is not having a set of wide receivers and a quarterback that can beat Ohio State, because that's the only way you're beating them this year. You're beating them with an elite offensive scheme that's super efficient like Georgia. They can do it. And maybe Alabama if their wide receiver situation gets figured out, which it's not right now. So does it really boil down to that? Or is this a situation where maybe a hard-nosed defense and physicality could beat an Ohio State?
Well, Notre Dame had some success, I think, with that approach in the opener. But that depends upon Ohio State being out of rhythm. And sitting here today, I don't think they are, and I don't think they're likely to be. Now, something I think that's important to bear in mind, right? Recent games in this series, Wisconsin has struggled with Ohio State a number of times. Really good Wisconsin teams have been blown out by Ohio State. And the reason for that is that when you play a team like Ohio State, they stress you in different ways than other teams can. Their athleticism on the perimeter exposes things. And we talked a lot about the A&M and Arkansas game, and we have differing opinions on that one, and that's, I think, an interesting video. Should be an interesting game to watch on Saturday. But my point on that one is that I feel like Arkansas's defense, look, I'm not comparing it to Wisconsin. I think Wisconsin's defense is a lot better than Arkansas's. But where Arkansas gets credit is they can be pretty hard-nosed and physical. They have physical linebackers, but they're great playing downhill. They are not great playing in space. And A&M had some ability to manipulate that. Wisconsin has some of those same tendencies, or has had them. I don't think the athleticism defensively is that high. I think they play really well within their system. I think they develop their players really well. I think they have some guys, they're really heady players that fly to the ball well. They're really physical. They're built to stop the run. That's kind of how they've recruited and built their identity. Ohio State can win a game scoring 40 to 60 points at 3 yards a carry. That's a problem for Wisconsin. And I think that's really where the Mertz conversation becomes important, because this is the one team really in the Big Ten where you can play really good defense and still give up 30, 40, 50 points. And if that's the case, you got to have a quarterback. And Mertz is not that guy. I know he had a couple good games against lesser competition, but I don't see the potential for him to go off. And if you look at what even like Toledo did, and I will say Toledo moved the ball pretty consistently, but they did it because Daquan Finn, and you were talking about this before, I don't want to steal your thunder, is a good quarterback. Daquan Finn is a good quarterback. Toledo, they beat UMass. They put up 55 points on them. That is a good team with a good quarterback that is really dynamic, and that's what I think it takes to move the ball in Ohio State. They still only score 21 points. So the problem for Wisconsin here is, if you think you can get in a Notre Dame game where this game's going to be like 25-17, sure, maybe you got a shot to win. I just think Ohio State's got their act together offensively now, and you're not going to get that game. And I don't know how Wisconsin can play a game where they got to score 35 and they got to throw the ball to do it. I don't see it with this roster.
Well, since you stole my thunder, why don't you let the model take any thunder that I got left?
Sure. So the model, being the first week, I'll give the short explainer. Our model is a per play based model that's based off your team, what your team has done this season. And what it basically does is it creates a profile for your team. It looks at the matchups between your team's profile and that other team's profile. And it does it in a way where A may be a good fit for B, B may beat C, C may beat A. It's a matchup based thing. And then based off that, it gets a projection of how it thinks the game's going to go. And for scoring, the way our model works is essentially it's a sort of a self-learning concept. Your team's production compared to scoring and how it worked out for your team creates its own model. Basically, every team has their own unique scoring model, and it varies a little bit. Some teams need more yardage or less yardage. Some teams get a lot of hidden yardage or hidden points from special teams, whatever. We keep it a little nebulous, but that's effectively how it works. And with this, one of the main things we generate is an intermediate statistic, which I still really wish people put this out there because it's a pretty simple statistic. I think it's easy to understand. Percentage of opponent average is allowed. So if my opponent is averaging 5 yards per carry and I allow 4, I've allowed 80% of their average. So it's just a basic stat to say, compared to how everybody else did against them, how did you do? Ohio State's numbers defensively, I think, show sort of two sides. Rush defense is 74%. That's very good. Now, an elite defense on against the run can get it down to about 60%. We see that quite a bit from elite defenses, but 74% is still very good. That's what I would call it. Borderline elite. 101% of opponent passing averages, though, is mediocre. It's very average. And that's what I was getting at earlier with the Mertz conversation. Ohio State has vulnerability right now in pass defense, at least in the statistically and how they show up they do. Wisconsin's defense is good, but it is not as good as it has been. 79% of opponent rushing averages is merely what I would call good. 87% of opponent passing averages is actually about average, especially when you take into account, right, that Wisconsin's played Washington State. When you put a New Mexico on there, that's what you end up having. And I think right now my camera cuts out, so hopefully Daniel can just throw up a picture of the model. But that's how those two things pan out. So the final score you have, projection, is 32-20 Ohio State over Wisconsin. Ohio State outgaining Wisconsin by about a half yard per play. Wisconsin, 6.5 yards per play is actually pretty good. That means they're projected to move the ball well. But as we said in a different video, anytime you get over 7 yards per play, offense takes off from a scoring perspective, and that's where Ohio State's projected to be.
Yeah, and my issue is even if Ohio State's given up 101% of opponent averages, I think Wisconsin's averages are telling a little bit of a lie. I think they had 16 something against New Mexico State, but they got barely better against Washington State than Washington State has allowed against Colorado State and Idaho. So they threw it slightly better than Idaho or Colorado State, and those are two just god awful teams. So I think that if we ran these numbers more at the end of the year, the yards per attempt numbers are going to be in the mid 7s in the model predictor, not 11. And so it's probably giving them maybe more points. But the issue for me is even if we give them those points, I think that they're going to give up more points, especially if they can't find their ground consistently on offense. They're going to give Ohio State some short fields, and that's just not what you want to do. So I've got a score for this one, and I'm going to go 44-20. Ohio State winning this one 44-20. Josh, maybe you've got your camera issues sorted. Maybe you haven't, but tell me what you got.
Sorry, learning the limits of my new camera, and it just overheated and turned off on me. Yeah, my score prediction for this one, I'm going to say 41-17 Ohio State. I do think this game could get pretty lopsided pretty quickly. And I think Ohio State's got things clicking. But frankly, I just don't think this is the best Wisconsin team this year. Again, just trying to be honest, which I always am. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe Wisconsin proves me wrong. Maybe they play great. It's hard to evaluate, but I don't think Washington State's a great team. And I thought that they, it didn't seem like a fluke that was a very close game. So, yeah, I think Ohio State's going to win this one pretty handily. And I think this is I think it says a lot about where Ohio State is, but frankly, I think it says at least as much about Wisconsin. And yeah, it's going to take a team with a better offense to stay with Ohio State this year for sure.
I know that Ohio State's working JSN back, working Fleming back maybe, but we warned people about Marvin Harrison Jr., and he had 102 yards at the half and a couple of touchdowns. I believe it was at the half. So it's funny because we saw, like, a lot of people said, yeah, that Ohio State wide receiver room, everybody talked about it. And then, a couple guys get hurt against Notre Dame, and then, they can't throw the ball. I think that this Saturday proved that they're on another level. And look, people are going to be like, look, it's Toledo. You scored 77 points against Toledo, but Alabama scored 63, and it was not from a consistently moving offense. We see a lot of these teams rack up points against lesser competition because they do things like Alabama did. A lot of non-offensive touchdowns. They had, I think, a punt return, a kick block, and a pick six out of that 63 points. So I think that there's credit to be given, and this is why we like to see teams dominate lesser opponents, is you can glean some stuff from these games. You can look at them and see how their offense is operating or not operating. Because our takeaway from the Bama-La Monroe game Saturday was that offense still needs some consistency with the wide receiver and the quarterback. And we took that away in a 63-7 win. So you can take stuff away from these, and that's why we tell people, go watch the games. People make fun of us for just looking at box scores. We don't. We watch the games, even against the Toledo Rockets. So y'all let us know what the score is going to be in the comments like you always do. Please make sure, if you haven't already, like, subscribe. Wisconsin fans, we love you too. Please share us wherever you want to share us. Maybe not this one since we picked you to lose, but mix it up with us in the comments too. We love you as well. Thanks so much, y'all. Have a great week. God bless.